Colin is a senior fellow here at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies and a professor of political science by courtesy here at Stanford. And I'm really excited about all the panels, especially this one. And I'm going to turn it over to Colin to kick us off. Over to you.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. It's still morning. As Andy said, I'm Colin Kahl. In addition to being a senior fellow at FSI, I co-direct the program on geopolitics, technology, and governance. I'm the faculty director, which basically means Andy does everything and I'm the figurehead. But I'm really excited about this panel. We've got a terrific group of experts to share their views with you all. To my immediate left is Glenn Tiffert, who's a distinguished research fellow at the Hoover Institution, which is right next door, but sometimes a whole world away. But no, good partners with us here at FSI. We've got Kazuto Suzuki, the director and group head of economic security at the Institute of Geoeconomics and a professor at the University of Tokyo. Thank you very much for being with us. And last but not least, we have Suh-Yong Chung, who's a professor at Korea University. And our panel was charged with discussing the geopolitical implications of computing power, especially as it relates to artificial intelligence. I think this will dovetail nicely with the conversation that preceded it, and including one of the last questions on export controls. We'll kind of circle back to that question in a minute. The plan is I'm going to ask a series of questions to get the panelists in dialogue with one another. We'll go for a while, and then we'll try to leave some time toward the end for questions from you all. All right, great. So for our entire panel, so a few months ago, President Trump released the long-awaited AI action plan for the United States. The title of the action plan actually is "Winning the AI Race," is what the AI action plan is called. That document and much of the conversation around AI in Washington and Silicon Valley frames this largely as a competition between two countries, the United States and China, for preeminence in artificial intelligence, with the goal of the Trump administration clearly being that the United States wins the race to the AI frontier, that it builds out the most advanced compute in the world, and that we diffuse the American AI stack, models to chips to data centers, built by American companies, pretty much all around the world except in China. So I guess we'll kind of go down, maybe start with Glenn, but going to go down the row here for everyone on the panel. And that is kind of, how is this race seen and understood outside of Washington and Silicon Valley, especially in Asia? How do countries in Asia think about this concept of a race, and who do they think is winning? Glenn?
Yeah, so let me pick up the China piece of that, which I know best. And I think it's quite evident that China has established, the game is on very clearly. And China also sees it as very much a bilateral competition with the world at stake. In particular, it's not yet there in the hardware, but it is very focused on achieving the hardware capability to challenge the United States and its East Asian partners with respect to the frontier. But particularly on software, it's applying significant investment in order to achieve embedded AI systems and embodied intelligence. It did not go all in on chatbots and LLMs the way that the U.S. market generally has. And instead, Xi Jinping, because I believe it has really a lot to do with his own Marxist materialist sort of upbringing, he's very focused on the real economy. And he wants AI to improve industrial processes, to improve, pharmaceutical research, to make manufacturing more efficient, to create new materials that will advance semiconductors and quantum. So to apply AI intelligence to make tangible objects that drive the economy, drive employment, drive GDP. And the focus of Chinese investment has very much been on that, which is quite, I think, different than the United States. It's not a pure binary dichotomy, but if you had to say where the weight of investment and weight of attention in each country is, that they're clearly in different places, with each recognizing that maybe it is overemphasized too much on one end, and so there's a bit of rebalancing going on. Now, the really important thing about China, I think, is that we not only just focus on the frontier, because where China may really, I think, put the United States in a very delicate position is, as we said, China's really pursuing the fast follower strategy. If its AI models and its AI hardware are 90% as good, or 80% as good as the frontier, but they're way cheaper, or they're made available for free, that may be adequate to achieve widespread global diffusion. And so they may, as Martin suggested, sort of, box us out of the market that way. And so we have to be very cognizant of competing below the frontier. So much attention is paid at the bleeding edge. And this is especially true of embedded systems. AI technologies and autonomous vehicles are getting a tremendous amount of attention. Computer vision technologies are getting tremendous amounts of attention. And some of that has to do also with applications that might give us tremendous discomfort, because China, of course, is not a democratic state that practices rule of law the same way we do. And so the surveillance dimensions, the suppression dimensions are very important in the Chinese space as well. I don't want to only focus on the software stack and the hardware, though, because I think what's often forgotten in the discussion about AI with respect to China is the data. China does not have the LLM data, the textual data for training, of very high quality that the US has generally been able to train on. But what it does have is very different kinds of data, like genomic data. It has data on human beings and biometrics at vast scale that nobody else has. And for Chinese players in the AI space who play well with the government and sign on, they get access to volumes of high quality data in those particular domains that is unequaled anywhere else in the world. And so if you're thinking about new drug discovery, if you're thinking about all kinds of applications that would rely on vast data sets, and the gravitational pull that having those data sets has to everyone else in the world who wants that data to work with, then that's something we also have to contend with.
Amazing. Kazuto, how is the view from Japan on this?
Right. So I'd like to mention, let's say, 4 points. One is about the hardware. I mean, from a Japanese point of view, the hardware issue has been the primary interest in this U.S. China AI race or the competition context, because Japan probably plays a large part of developing the Chinese hardware capability of computing power, building the semiconductor GPU for the AI. So I think one of the aspects for Japan is to be on, since the AI has the application, the significant application on the military side, it is considered as a question of the security matters. So export control over the semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China is partially considered as a part of the security policy rather than the AI policy. But as long as a hardware issue is, in order to prevent the Chinese AI to be developed into a sort of the competitive level in the military field, it is necessary to remain to limit the computing power of China. So that's the first hardware layer that we are focusing on, and that's probably comes up the first issue. The secondary issue is the software problem. I think one of the impact that the DeepSeek has made in Japan was its pricing and also its openness. The open source framework has been considered to be one of the threat for or let's say giving more advantages for the Chinese AI to be competitive in the global market. So the U.S. U.S. focuses on the the cutting edge, the AI frontier issue seems to be somewhat changed I think the DeepSeek has changed the game. It will place the U.S. AI product to be more expensive, more closed, more distant. Whereas the DeepSeek creates more opportunities for for not only the Chinese users but also the the Japanese developers to access the DeepSeek platforms. The third layer is the following the second point is the diffusion of the DeepSeek to the third world countries. And I think this has been considered, I mean, because of this AI race is binary between the United States and China, but at the same time, there are a lot of countries which are seeking for developing their sovereign AI capabilities. But for many countries that doesn't have the foundational models, they tend to adopt to the DeepSeek models or any open source platforms to build up their own sovereign AI capabilities. So, although it's not the fully sovereign from the foundational level, but many countries, especially in the Southeast Asia and other developing countries in the Middle East or South Asia, they tend to build up their sovereign AI capabilities based on the Chinese platforms. So that's the third point in the context of U.S. China rivalries. It's not just the bilateral competition, it's a global competition, and to that extent, the Chinese influence is much bigger in a global scale. The fourth point is as Glenn mentioned about the data. The size of data that China has is much bigger, and it creates a huge potential for the Chinese AI development processes, whereas the United States, Europe, Japan, the concept of DFFT, the data free flow with trust, was supposed to be creating a coherent data set for non-Chinese, data, including United States, Japan, Europe, and India to a large extent. But the problem is that the EU AI rules and AI diffusion rules, those national rules are now making it much harder for having this, the coherent data flow and the data, creating a data set. So that will give more advantages for the Chinese data set. So I think that's been the problem, and I think in that context, Japan is obviously as an ally of the United States, and we see the AI as partially as a security issues. So we'll be very much of concern that the Chinese growth in the AI would have a certain impact on the Japanese security issues, but still, I think the U.S. policies are very much dominant by these closed models like OpenAI. So we are just watching it from a distance on that end.
Fantastic. Suh-Yong, how is the U.S. China AI race seen from South Korea?
Sure. Because this is my first time to take the floor in this room, it's always good to be here. I was at Stanford before. I'm a Stanford product. I used to work on the third floor for my research assistantship and also postdoctoral work. At the time that I was working on the IT policy of Republic of Korea, also Silicon Valley. It's always good for me to be back here again, even if I'm back almost every year, but good to be here today. I'm wearing a tie today. Yesterday we were discussing about the dress code, and then so I thought that whether I should wear the hot pants or formal suit because I'm representing the Korea today. So I thought that I would wear the tie, but after this session I will take it off. And then so that I will come back to
I wore my nice sneakers.
Sure.
We have a sliding scale here.
Also here, I'm here not only as a professor of Korea University, but also for AI. Actually, I have done a lot of work as the president of one think tank in Korea, Seoul International Academy, which has more than 40 years of history, having a lot of strong networks over the foreign policy network in Republic of Korea. Current chairman, my boss, used to be the foreign minister, Yoon Byung-se. And then in our board, we have many former high-level diplomats working together. AI has been one of the main focuses these days. So responding to the question, I'm sure that you know that there was APEC summit meeting recently in Korea. Maybe it's going to be interesting to introduce what happened in APEC to respond to the question here. So during the APEC, of course, APEC is a summit meeting, but there are a lot of side events, including the bilateral summit meetings. That happens with the Republic of Korea for sure. So we had President Lee had many summit meetings. First with, of course, the United States, and then you should know that President Trump really loved crown that is made of the gold, right? That has helped actually Korea to achieve the big task that we have been working for a long time. It was not AI, but also nuclear submarine. Okay, so there was one of the hot topic that has been put on the table for the discussions. However, in terms of AI, what happened? It was not mainly with President Trump, but with Jensen Huang. Right? He came to Korea, and then during the APEC meeting, there was a big media coverage having the chimek. Do you know what it is? Chicken and beer. Right? You should try that if you come to Seoul, not only listening to K-pop, but you should try chimek. Right? So it's wonderful, and then I'm sure that Jensen Huang heard about it, so he suggests to have a chimek gathering together with Samsung and then the Hyundai Motors. I don't know why the Hynix didn't come, so all those leaders that they got together, and then they build up some of the spirit to work together, and then the Jensen Huang also gave a big gift. President Trump gave a big gift to allow Korea to maintain the nuclear submarine. But Jensen Huang, it was Jensen Huang who gave the big gift to Korea by promising that his company will provide 260,000 GPU to Hyundai, Hynix, and then Samsung. So that would build sort of the strong ties with the United States through the corporate world, so that Samsung and Hynix can be equipped with a great capacity to go further. Also, Hyundai Motors, I think it will lead some of the automated driving technologies in the future. So this is the way in which I saw regarding the AI during the APEC meeting. However, do you know that what gift did the President Xi Jinping give to the President Lee of the Republic of Korea during the summit meeting between China and Korea? Exactly. So that's interesting, right? So I thought, first of all, that's too small. Korea, gave the gift to President Trump with a gold-made crown. It was a Xiaomi cell phone. And then do you know what is the question that the President Lee of the Republic of Korea asked to Xi, President Xi? Is it safe, right? Is it safe? So is it cybersecurity issues okay, right? Do you know what is the response by the President Xi regarding the question? Oh, check it out, whether there is a backdoor. Okay? So it was a very wonderful conversation. It implies a lot. right? In other words, bringing these two into the one angle of the responding to the question, I think that Republic of Korea sees the sort of the U.S. Policy toward AI more like corporate-based, because as an alliance of the United States, I think for the security matters, for the general policy, I think Korea will be pretty much inclined to the position of the United States. The question is how we would hedge some of the potential risks of the policy of the United States, especially through export control. Regarding the China for now, I would see that it's more like a security focused, right? We should approach the issues of AI with China, even if Samsung and Hynix might have a lot of interest in working together with the Chinese counterparts, but we have to screen the security issues first. So there is a different layer of the considerations on how Republic of Korea would shaping its policy toward this bilateral competition between the United States and China. APEC summit meetings gave us a lot of good hints on how Korea's policy would move forward. So that's my initial response.
Super interesting. I think one of the things that the initial response has highlighted is that it's not terribly productive to think of the AI race along just one dimension. So look, I think most of the way that it's talked about in Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. is the race to the frontier. Whether people are AGI pilled or not, there is a belief that we are in an extraordinarily competitive national competition and corporate competition to the very frontier of what AI is possible of producing. And the inputs into that are algorithms, data, talent, computing resources, the chips, the data centers, energy, increasingly, which is a big bottleneck in building out those computing resources, and then the overarching national policy and strategy of promoting innovation. I list those off because the only areas where the United States has a meaningful advantage at the moment are on the quality of our models, which are probably 6 to 12 months ahead of the best Chinese models, and the quality and volume of our compute, which is probably 5 to 10 years ahead of where China is. But as the panel mentioned, China's a fast follower. I think that was the shock of DeepSeek, is that even with all of the constraints, they don't have data problems, they don't have talent problems. They're in fact an electrostate that will break through the energy bottlenecks in ways the United States will not be able to. They can compete with the United States if they get sufficient access to compute, all right, at the frontier. But, and I want to come back to that in a second. But there are all these other dimensions of the race. How quickly does AI diffuse across the economy? How widely is it applied for industrial applications, that is turning bits into atoms? How widely is it adopted by national security and military entities within a country? And how much and whose stack is responsible for its global diffusion? What types of models running on what types of chips with what types of infrastructure? Will it be the cutting edge American stack, or will it be the good enough but much cheaper Chinese stack? These are all parts of the competition. But the U.S. strategy, look, there's a lot of, I worked in the Biden administration. There aren't a lot of commonalities between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, but one commonality across these technology questions are on the of export controls and in pushing our allies to apply those export controls. So the very first export controls on advanced lithography equipment emerged during the first Trump administration, with a lot of conversations with Japan and the Netherlands in particular on semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Then Biden dialed up the restrictions on semiconductor manufacturing equipment and tools and software, but especially on leading edge chips. And every time NVIDIA designed one that was slightly dumbed down but avoided the export controls got tightened and tightened and tightened to limit what could go to China. And then Trump came in and initially, in his second term, banned the H20 chip to China. The AI Action Plan talks about tightening enforcement, especially on semiconductor manufacturing equipment. The Trump administration then reversed itself on the H20, and then China said, we don't want to buy those things anyway. So I guess the question is here, it's clear that one bipartisan consensus about how the U.S. wins the race is to trip China on the track. right? To hobble their ability to compete. So I have a question, and we'll start maybe with you, Suh-Yong. A big, probably the most important thing right now in limiting China's ability to indigenously produce good enough chips is restricting their access to high bandwidth memory. Because Huawei can produce, probably next year, will produce many hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million Ascend 910 chips, which are okay, like they're as good as the NVIDIA chips from 2022, except they have no HBM. They gobbled up a bunch of South Korean HBM right before the export controls kicked in at the end of the Biden administration. They're going to run out of all of those. So how committed is South Korea, do you think, to maintaining and tightening export controls designed to prevent China from indigenously closing the gap on chips?
So you're asking me about South Korea's policy on this?
Yeah.
Well, as I indicated that, I think that we cannot have one sure response or answer to this question because, and every day AI world is moving. And then there are, different variables that they might affect on this. So I indicated that how Korea would react to this issue. I think Seoul may be in contact with Washington and then tries to discuss on what are the common grounds that the two countries may consider, because we are talking about export control. It's about the government. I indicated that the image that I shared with you is that regarding the AI, government push the companies to go ahead because South Korea might be in line with the position of the United States. If there is anything that South Korean companies can work with Chinese counterparts, then we can allow. But as long as it should be in line with what our close allies, United States is the most important, maybe Japan, maybe Europeans and others could agree on this. So this is what we are thinking about. And then we are hoping that there will be a sort of the more common ground to be shared for sure soon. It's a pretty much a U.S.-driven policy-making process. President Trump's influence is so big, and then he is somewhat, emphasizing you listen to the United States. So, but it will be good if we can develop sort of the soft law guidelines to share together, and if there is any room where we can share that by inviting China, if allowable, so that South Korea can have a more flexible ground to shape up our policy on this very hard, issues that you have asked on to answer.
Kazuto, can you talk a little bit about how Japan sees this at the moment when the Trump administration and the first Trump administration and the Biden administration started to push controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment? This was not popular among Japanese firms for understandable reason. It cost them business. I think it's conceivable that even if Trump ultimately loosens restrictions on more advanced NVIDIA chips, he didn't when he met with Xi Jinping just recently. He did not actually offer the kind of modified version of the Blackwell chips, which is something that Jensen Huang was pushing for, and that folks around the president, like David Sachs, were pushing for. He did not do that. But I can imagine a world in which Donald Trump decides to loosen controls on more advanced NVIDIA chips while tightening controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment. And one way that might do is to really put pressure on countries like Japan to not service the contracts of the machines that are already in China. How do you think, how durable do you think Japan's commitment is to restricting China's access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment?
Well, I think it's it's quite doable. I think for the last 3 years since the Biden administration demanded for restricting for the restriction on the semiconductor manufacturing equipment, the Japanese companies Japanese companies are relatively flexible in that regard. We are exporting the lower end equipment to make sure that we get business going while limiting the advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So this is something that you can make a threshold. I mean, some of the equipments are designed for the high-end chips, whereas some of the products are not designed for that. So there are the companies which are exporting to the other semiconductor manufacturing countries like Taiwan, South Korea, they can make business out of the without sending the high-end machines to China. Probably if that goes, the restrictions goes to the material, then that will be much more difficult because the material doesn't discriminate the high-end chips and low-end chips. So and Japanese are also very much strong in semiconductor materials. So that will be the concern if there is a stretch of this control over the semiconductor. Despite the United States relaxing the regulation on the high-end chips, but pushing the real control over the equipment and the material, then that will be a bigger problem. So far, if the U.S. policies of controlling the semiconductor manufacturing equipment as of now, then I think it is acceptable. Although it's not ideal, but so far the Japanese companies understand the importance of controlling the Chinese manufacturing level to limit the Chinese manufacturing level. So I think this will this will change if the regulation goes extended to the material issues.
Glenn, when I worked at the Pentagon, the military liked to say the adversary gets a vote. Mm-hmm. So China's not passively standing still as it is targeted with export controls. Critics of export controls have basically said, look, when you generate artificial scarcity, it forces innovation, it forces indigenization. And I think just this past week, the government in Beijing announced that they're going to be offering, I think, a 50% subsidy on energy to data centers that use Chinese chips, for example, in China. They're kind of seem to be all in on the indigenization of Huawei chips to compete with NVIDIA. Certainly, Jensen Huang has made the argument that Huawei is nipping at NVIDIA's heels, which I think only he believes, but that is nevertheless an understandable concern. Can you say a little bit about how effective you think China is in kind of adapting its approach given the export controls?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of angles to this, and there is a very vigorous debate in U.S. export control circles about the extent to which we want to keep them hooked on U.S. devices and U.S. materials and U.S. equipment, or in fact export control them and box them out of it, which then might in fact incentivize them to try to do import substitution. I think actually we pay too much attention to that. It makes a lot of sense to have that debate domestically. But China years ago identified this market as one that it wanted to own independent of U.S. export controls. And so for its own reasons, it wants to essentially import substitute and replace U.S. dominance and Japanese and Korean dominance in all of the sort of sectors of the semiconductor industry with Chinese firms and Chinese products. That happened well before the export controls were seriously contemplated. And my own feeling about this is that the export controls are sort of secondary to that. And export controls, of course, they only buy you time. And so at best, what they do is then they're complementary to a strategy to promote semiconductor development and promote pushing the frontier here in the United States and among our allies and partners. And what we're not quite seeing at this particular moment is that coherent strategy of technology promotion. And in fact, there seems to have been a few steps backward in the last 10 months with regard to that we need to recover from to articulate a new path forward. Now, I wonder if I could stray out of my lane, because this is really important, I think, for just the collective approach to this. You know, at the moment, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan have significant markets in China. But that window is closing. There's a time limit on it. The clock is ticking. China does not want a semiconductor ecosystem in which it's dependent on Japanese photoresist or Korean HBM memory. For the moment, those are good, profitable markets. But as Nexperia has discovered, with respect to the auto industry, you know, China has a mark on their back. And so with each passing year, those opportunities will erode. And if I were Samsung, if I was Tokyo Electron, I would see more opportunities in the United States, which is not trying to replace their share of the market, but in fact, marshal them together as part of a team. And that's a more sustainable strategy, I think, for the alliance to hold. Going all in on China and trying to hold on to market share, I think, is perhaps a fool's errand. It makes sense for quarterly revenues, but it is not a long-term strategy. And so China's going to go for it, export controls or not. And we, I think, need to devise a positive strategy for then how do we continue to innovate to ensure that we're staying ahead.
Can I just
please.
add a little bit more? Earlier, I said that it might be good for sort of the Korea and then together with the United States and other allying countries to develop the sort of the soft guidelines. What I meant is that companies don't that much care about the security implications. Right. Companies do care about predictability, right? Transparency. So it's okay for United States to strengthen your export control, then companies will respond accordingly. Rather, from my point of view, the problem or challenge was that you strengthen and then now loosen, so companies don't know what to do in the future, right? So it created a more confusion to the companies. So that's why I was suggesting that among the allies, if necessary, we'd better sit down and then see who's gonna do what, and then in the context that the private sectors do what, right? That's what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, this certainty thing is a real challenge for our allies and partners, and for all the rest of us. I mean, look, as you know, the same week that the Trump administration put out the AI action plan, which called for tightening enforcement of export controls, they loosened export controls on the H-20. Like the same, and that was a decision by the president. And it was a decision by factions around the president that had lost the debate during the AI action plan drafting and then relitigated and got the president to change his mind. And my understanding, as the president was flying to Asia, the various factions were debating on Air Force One, vociferously about the Blackwell decision, and that decision wasn't made until the very last second. It was a nail biter about whether Trump was going to go in and cave on the Blackwells. And for those who, the most advanced Blackwell chips are substantially better than the H100s, which is kind of the version of, Huawei's best chip, the Ascend 910. Even if it had the memory, is only as good as the H100, which is a 2022 chip. The Blackwell chips are meaningfully better, 4 to 6 times better, I think, essentially, than those chips. And NVIDIA has proposed to sell a version of the Blackwell chips called the B30A, which would be half as capable as the most advanced Blackwell chips, but also half the price, which means you can buy 2 of them and achieve the chip together. And Trump at times has talked about, flirted with making that decision, and but it was this close. So that's just to say, we're all confused. Yeah. Like on any given day, we don't know which way things are going back and forth. And I don't know President Trump well at all. I think he has very, very, very strong convictions on trade imbalances. Mm-hmm. Like you go back to the 1980s, like He believes that the trade deficit is the #1 national security threat that isn't about our borders or immigration. He believes that that trade deficit, that our allies are just as responsible for it as places like China, and he's obsessed with reducing it. And it's completely conceivable that he will cut a deal with China in the next year or two that essentially caves in on export controls in order to sell a bunch of chips and reduce the trade deficit with China. And so, yeah, if I'm sitting in Tokyo or Seoul or anywhere else, I'd be uncertain too. All right,
Colin,
sorry, please, Glenn, please.
Go ahead and I'll follow you.
Sorry, I triggered it. Sorry.
I just wanted to add or to comment on what you said about the Tokyo Electron. Tokyo Electron's portion of the export is that the 40% goes to China, 20% goes to Korea, 20% goes to Taiwan, 10% goes to United States. So it's basically of course, the recent changes of establishing the factories in Arizona made a different port. I think there's generally a different proportion of the exports, but still, China is the largest.
It is.
Largest company, largest export destination, and I mean this will not change for them. So that these 40% is basically non high-end products, and
which means it's vulnerable to Chinese replacement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I commenting on the unpredictability of the Trump administration, we also have to put that into a context of the U.S. China negotiation on the tariffs. In terms of the balance of power between the United States and China in the negotiating positions, China has much more upper hand because of the rare earth minerals and other restrictions that China has a leverage over the U.S. policies. So this is one of the reasons why the H-20 was released, whereas the Blackwell was kept regulated, but still it's the China has a lot of leverage against the United States to change the restrictions on export of the high-end chips. So probably we need to take that into a concern when we try to calculate the what actions that the United States will take. And this is the Tokyo's view that that the United States can be conceding to the China for the semiconductor in expense of the getting a much more relaxed export control over the rare earth mineral.
I just want to make two really brief points. I mean, here we are talking about governments and export controls, but firms, particularly firms the size of NVIDIA or Samsung or SK Hynix, have their own foreign policies, right? They do not move in lockstep with their governments, and very often they will have their own interests, which may be tangential or orthogonal to their government interests. So I think it's important for us to distinguish between firms and governments and not to just speak of, Korea Inc., Japan Inc., America Inc. And then, the second point, which is extremely important, is that, the export controls are not hermetic. It's a little bit hard to smuggle an EUV machine, but it is not hard to smuggle NVIDIA chips, and we know that they're very porous.
Yeah.
And so, not the chips, the export controls. And so there are plenty of NVIDIA chips and GPUs getting into the China market through third parties in the same way of, there's sanctions and sanctions avoidance and transshipment problems. And so this is something we also have to contend with and think about strategically.
Yeah, I mean, I think on this score, there's no question there's actually some very good documentaries about NVIDIA smuggling. You can watch them on YouTube and other places.
Yeah.
That said, when you're talking about the computing clusters that the OpenAIs and Microsofts and Anthropics and Googles and Metas are building, you're talking about data centers that have hundreds of thousands of leading edge chips consuming gigawatts of power, and China's not going to smuggle that.
This is why the UAE is important.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
They might get access to the compute through a third party, through a cloud provider in Malaysia or the UAE or somewhere else. But actually, it's pretty hard for 1 million chips to fall off the back of a truck. Okay, the next question, and Kazuto, you mentioned this, I think, in your opening remarks about the real push around the world for sovereign AI.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could tease that out a little bit in the Japan context or the wider Asian context about what do countries mean when they say sovereign AI? Like, what does that entail? Does that entail making their own foundation models? Does that entail making their own chips? Does that entail building their own data centers? Does it involve partnering with American companies or other companies to do all that inside, in which case it's sovereign because it's in your country, but maybe not sovereign if Microsoft built the data center and it's full of NVIDIA chips and it's running OpenAI models. I don't know how sovereign that feels to me, but like, what does sovereign AI mean, and how plausible is it?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I think it depends on different countries. Different countries sees the sovereign AI or the reasons for having a sovereign AI differently. And one of the elements of the sovereign AI is that you don't want to be controlled by the other parties. For example, if you are trying to build the sovereign AI, or if you don't have a sovereign AI, then you might depend on the AI platforms by Chinese platform or the American platforms. And that will automatically assume that the values or the way in which that the AI respond to your questions or your demands in accordance to the value set or value systems that is based on the U.S. or the Chinese society. So, for example, I mean, the clearest example is that, if you ask the DeepSeek about Tiananmen Square, then, it won't respond to you. And that sort of things are being concerned by some of the countries, especially in Japan, that the Japanese government is now providing this. I think Mr. Ishikawa has mentioned about the Japanese the AI guidelines that is not just to regulate, but also to promote the Japanese AI program, or let's say the sovereign AI, because of the concerns that the American values or the Chinese values are penetrating into the use of AI for the society. And that has been the major concerns for Japanese government. But some of the other countries are considering the use of sovereign AI as the tools for the governance. For example, the autocratic governments wants to control over its own AI for imposing certain, policy values or the governance values against the people, so that they are forcing the people to use their sovereign AI in order to facilitate the control over people. So, because the AI has a very deep, connections to the not just the AI as a tool, but also AI as a value set, that would have a significant impact on the way in which that people think and people evaluate the issues. And I think that's one of the reasons why the countries want to have a sovereign AI. And how are they going to build the sovereign AI? That depends on the different countries. Some countries like Japan or probably South Korea, which are capable of building the sort of a foundational model, can provide the sovereign AI based on the foundational models. But if there are different countries which are not capable of developing its own foundational models, then they would use the existing models, and especially the open source foundational model will be the most preferable and likely case that they are going to use as the foundational models.
I don't know, Suh-Yong, do you have any views on this? And Glenn, if you have views, I'd like to hear them too.
So if you take a look at the structure of the President Office of Republic of Korea now, and then one of the features that the current new Lee Jae-myung administration put on the emphasis is to create the Senior Secretary on the AI Policy Office. And then underneath, there is a Secretary to the President on the climate and energy. So this is the key sort of the flagship issues that the current administration initially reviewed, and then I'm sure that this focus will be maintained for upcoming 5 years, right? Yeah, not 3 years, 5 years. So in the sense that, of course, the sovereign AI ideas were presented. And then I think there are still different versions of what the sovereign AI means. But the way which I understand about the current Korean policy on sovereign AI centers on data center, also together with supply of energy. So by mixing two, then Korea focuses on the building domestic and international, even regional capabilities on clouds, AI factories, digital twin infrastructure. So for the specific plan for implementation of this plan, this policy is that probably data center will be established. I assume that in the southern western part of the Korean Peninsula, which is the basic supporting reason for the current administration. Also, currently government reviewed that regarding the climate and energy policy, they will build AI super highway, right, by providing the renewable-based electricity, right, which might require a lot, and then the energy supply will be made by the huge investments on the electricity, possibly together with SMRs as well. So it's about it, and the reason why data center is so important. Korea said that we want to be the number 3 in AI world in the world after United States and China. And then the idea of this is not to overcome any challenges, but more like make sure that we are secure enough, right, to contain the most critical information. Yesterday, the participants has a very interesting little chats about how we respond to the critical disastrous situation that somebody might bomb the data center in Silicon Valley, then Korea might need to have a backup plan, right? So in the sense that I think the sovereign AI doesn't necessarily indicate that Korea want to go over the, say, United States. No, that's not what I understand. Korea wants to have a more secured, platform through which we can possibly better coordinate with our allies' policies on AI.
For those of you who are worried that the bombing might actually happen in Silicon Valley, rest assured, most of the data centers are in Virginia and increasingly in Texas. Georgia. Glenn, do you have
a couple of angles on this. It isn't really purely the AI sovereignty that we have to think about. It's also the data sovereignty, too. Governments naturally want to be able to tell their citizens that the data that's collected from them is secure and treated in a way that's consistent with the laws and standards and values of a particular country. And so I think it's very important to sort of connect data sovereignty and AI sovereignty together. It isn't just the values, of course, that the AI models are trained on. It is also the regulatory choices that shape the way those models are built and the architectures, which could get exported to other nations. And nations don't want to be passive recipients of that either. They may wish to make their own regulatory choices about the architectures of the models. Now, I've recently been, in the last year and a half, in conferences in South Africa and Brazil, which were very eye-opening for me because we talked a lot about AI, and it was clear to me that many of the participants in those conferences from Africa and South America, this race, this binational race for frontier AI was leaving them very cold, because what it did is it pushed all of the buttons about global inequality. A world that AI was happening to them rather than they having a voice in the creation of AI. It was something that was being imposed on them that they had no control over, like a flood washing over them. And that was deeply unsettling to them, and it also just, again, like I say, exacerbated their sense that not every nation is listened to equally in the world, which we know, of course, is true. But beyond that, there was also a sense in which AI has tremendous potential to meet unmet needs in places that are resource challenged. Just think about provision of basic health care in rural areas, in countries that don't have well built out medical infrastructures, right? And so their priorities in nations in Africa and perhaps South America and parts of South Asia may be different than our priorities. And our models may not serve their needs in the same way. So sovereignty is also related to that as well. So let me go to a dark place for the moment, because there's an interesting line of research coming out that suggests that LLM models may also change the balance between proliferation enabling and detection enabling technologies, and allow countries that are interested in climbing the ladder of nuclear and chemical weapons proliferation faster, overcoming the initial sort of hurdles in acquiring technical capability, simply because that knowledge will be baked into some of the models and it has not been stripped out, or the guardrails have not been built there. So it may change the stability of the NPT regime as well if we don't think about it in these terms. So that may also be a reason why governments want to control AI models, for good and bad.
So I think this conversation's super helpful. I wish, frankly, that more of the conversations around sovereign AI were this transparent. I mean, in my sense, and I think it resonates with the panelists, essentially what countries are interested in is some combination of models that are fine-tuned or trained to represent particular cultural, linguistic contexts and particular developmental requirements. And do not necessarily, where it's not just a cut and paste of what they're getting from America or from China, combined with some degree of data sovereignty and localization. Essentially that data, health records, government data, sensitive data stays local. I think that's the de minimis definition of sovereign AI, but I think we should also be realistic that for the foreseeable future, all of those fine-tuned models will be built on top of either American or Chinese foundation models in the vast majority of countries. And they will, that data sovereignty will probably live in data centers that are full of NVIDIA chips and built by American hyperscalers, who are 70% of the global cloud market, and the other 30% are the Alibabas of the world. So it's sovereignty-ish, but is that really sovereignty in the world that I just described? All right, Glenn, you've invoked a couple things that I want to drill down on. Early on, you talked about one place where China may beat the United States is on the industrial application of AI. And then in the comment you just gave, you talked about concerns, especially in the global south, about being left behind and that AI is going to lock in an almost neo-imperial sense of inequality among, that's my words, not yours. But it's an anxiety that I've heard from many of my friends in the global south. Let me be a little provocative. I can imagine in the next 10 years, as we get increasingly close to something we might recognize as artificial general intelligence, that you get a kind of artificial intelligence bipolarity between the United States and China, but it's not a symmetrical one. In other words, the United States leads at the frontier and essentially dominates the global provision of the most advanced AI as a service, in much the way that the United States dominates the global financial system, right? So this plays into all of America's strengths. The United States dominates AI, maybe even AGI, as a service to the world. But China dominates in embodied AI and the industrial application of AI, which means that China already produces more than the free world put together as it relates to industrial capacity. Think about the number of phones they pump out, the number of electric vehicles they pump out, the number of dark factories that are pumping those out already without human beings. And so China's industrial overcapacity dials to 11. So America dominates AI as a service. China dominates the industrial application of AI. What's left for everybody else?
Right. So I'd like to change that world, because the bifurcation that you describe actually frightens me terribly. Because
do you think it's implausible, or do you think?
I think it's possible, but not stable, and it's not a desirable outcome. Because I think we all learned from the United States that we can have all the services we want. This happened during COVID, but if we can't get PPEs, if we can't get the tangible products that we depend on for our daily lives, and if China is manufacturing those, not just at the sort of the low scale, but even at the high technology scale, then that leaves us extraordinarily vulnerable to political coercion and leverage and disruption in our supply chains. So it might be a really comfortable place when everything is working very smoothly, but it isn't when, presidents and general secretaries sit down and they hash out bargains. Who has more leverage in that situation? It's also perhaps not a stable place because it's not clear to me that China would be satisfied with just owning the manufacturing space, the tangible product space. We see it's also right now trying to develop alternative payment rails to replace the SWIFT system because it's seen the way the U.S. and its allies have used sanctions against Russia in the Ukraine war. And so again, I think that is not a desirable outcome. What I would like, and the U.S., you're right, is absolutely strong in services, is for us to work with our global allies and partners at every level of economic development to ensure that we fill in all those gaps in the value chain and offer them something to sort of raise their national wealth and create more jobs. That's the Koreas, that's the Japans, it's the Brazils, it's the Malaysias and others. To come along with us. And that's the outcome that I hope that we can engineer.
Can I ask a question, though, about this from a U.S. versus China perspective? Because the Trump administration is all in on diffusion, but their model of diffusion is essentially to flood the zone by unleashing the market, right? Basically, they overturned the Biden area diffusion rule. With the exception of restrictions going to China, they want to flood the zone everywhere else. And that's great if you want to build enormous data centers in Abu Dhabi or Riyadh or in India or Brazil or Malaysia. But there are huge chunks of the world, especially in the global south, where there aren't enough customers, there aren't enough people, there may not be enough infrastructure for our companies to invest on their own. In other words, the market is just going to the American stack is not going to go to a bunch of parts of the world. China has a different strategy. We saw it with Belt and Road. We saw it with Digital Silk Road. We see it with their global AI initiative, which is a top-down, willing to subsidize, provide a vertical stack. Here's AI in a box, and they will actually. So, who wins if the United States and China are competing to diffuse? Does the United States have a strategy that will actually compete with good enough Chinese AI?
Not at the moment. But we have to get away from thinking that the world is all about hyperscalers. If Ford wants to compete with BYD, it has to be an AI company. If we want to sell medical devices to people around the world, we have to have embedded AI. If we want to build factories, we have to have robots that have embodied intelligence in them. And so it is about much more than hyperscalers. If you're sort of framing it as that competition, it's got to be the full stack.
Yeah.
Can I ask our other panelists what's the niche? What's the niche for South Korea? What's the niche for Japan? What's the niche for those who aren't the United States and China? What's the comparative advantage in a world where the inequalities that already exist in terms of U.S. dominance of global services and China's dominance of global industrial production are made worse by AI?
I think I fully agree with Glenn that this is not about the hyperscaler or just the, the industrial product by China. And I think there's lots of the AI application in between. I think, Japan has been working pretty much on the niche of not being a hyperscaler, but, providing the AI for the medical analysis or AI for the, a legal analysis. There are a lot of, competitive industry, competitive AI providers in, as a service. So it's not the foundational models, or it's not the, the hyperscalers providing all the data center and all that, but probably, the Japan will be able to play as the sort of a provider of the applications for the particular purposes. And these are extremely important because, not all large language models are necessary. I mean, these applications requires a particular, set of the AI products. And what kind of, the foundational model, the training models that you're going to use is going to be a problematic, but still, I think this is more about, compared to, I think Colin has mentioned about the service as the US dollar, but I think that's quite different because at the end of the day, the AI diffusion is based on the market. I mean, it's about the companies playing different roles and seeking a different market. The AI usually, the hyperscaler has a lot of advantages because the externality works in this economy. But when it comes to the applications, I think that those are the different levels or different layers of the market that there are different demands and supplies exist. So I think we need to see it in a different layers, and I think that Japanese are still being competitive in the application market, whereas the Americans, Chinese dominant in the the production side and the basic infrastructure side.
Suh-Yong, last comment to you, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions.
Sure. Responding to your question, I think that we need to know that which area of the world, led by the United States and China, would maintain the bigger market size in the future. I think that's important because AI technology itself doesn't know the existence of territory, right? We are secretizing the AI technologies in the context of the competition between the US and China, right? That's number one. So number two, what China is doing. Before I came here, because APEC thing, that there are a lot of activities in Korea, and then I participated in some of them, including my participation with other international discussions organized by CGTN, okay? And the theme was a global governance initiative, right? If we are familiar with China, then you know there's something special meaning. But in general, you will think, oh, that's a good thing, right? It's a global governance. It's always the good thing that we're going to talk about. But it's a very China-centric thing, right? What I'm talking about, let's bring me something different issue area, climate change, right? Climate change, if we are familiar with the climate change, now the Paris Agreement is dealing with everything. Paris Agreement was possible to be agreed in the year 2015 only because of the two countries, China and United States, right? Without these two, then it was not possible. And then now, what's happening with the Paris Agreement, that the US is pulling itself out of the Paris Agreement. And then Paris Agreement is all about creating 2 to 8% of global GDP, new market. Oh, it comes to only China now. Okay, so under the theme of global governance initiative, actually China is taking over all the markets, potential markets. And these markets not about in Europe or in United advanced economies, it's in Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. When we talk about the future size of the economy in AI industry, we have to, that's why I think you pulled that issue up, we have to think about how this way of thinking can be communicated with those who are in Africa, Latin America, and South Asia, right? And then the image and even the reality that the United States is making that, America first, I know, that means that the U.S. wants to be a hegemon, right? To maintain the global order, you have to provide the side payments as well. And then, is there any component that we can build in order to catch the potential big possibly market in developing world? In that sense, China, I know that what China is doing, right? They have been working a lot on the One Belt and One Road policy and security the supply chain of the critical minerals. And then they already got the most of economies in Africa. I don't know about Latin America, but in South Asia as well, right? And their economy is booming. So what we can do? So in that sense, I kept emphasizing we have to also think about not only talking about the U.S. China competition. I know the superiority of the capacity of the United States led AI technology world, but we have to diffuse our influence over the world. That's why we need to think about that aspect as well.
I think it's a really important point. I think just to foot stomp the Africa piece, it's the most demographically dynamic part of the world. It's the youngest, it's the fastest growing. There will be as many people in Africa at the end of this century as there are in Asia. There will be more people in Nigeria than there are in China because Nigeria's population is going like this and China's population is imploding. So to leave that big a chunk of humanity on the sidelines, which I don't feel like the United States is prioritizing Africa very much at the moment. Maybe that will change, but I think the point's really important. Okay, we have about 15 minutes. Please say who you are and make your questions brief, and we'll start over here. Gentleman with the hat and the scarf. Hold on, you've got a mic coming.
Thank you. Henry Etzkowitz, University of London. So, naturally, I'm going to suggest the coming era of un-Brexit, uniting the firepower, intellectual firepower of Oxbridge and the financial firepower of the European Union. Not to mention the rest of the world. Where do you think the postdocs and PhD students come from that power this university? So I would suggest a broader view, also that the US and China are deeply embedded intellectually, and R&D and startups, even though they're now being split apart a bit. I think those ties are inexorable and will not break. So I'm suggesting a much more distributed view of the world, and that the current two-party system may not hold.
So it's true that there's a lot of talent that comes from the UK and the EU that comes to the United States and sits in our companies, but they come to the United States and sit in our companies. So the question I have is and it's hard to name, with the exception of ASML, a single important European company in the global AI ecosystem. So do we think that this more distributed future is the future? That is, that more of the talent will go other places, more of the chips will be built in different places, more of the models will be developed in different places. Do we see evidence that there will be a distribution away from the AI bipolarity that I described towards an AI multipolarity?
I think there's a possibility of the multipolarity, especially the United States is kind of refusing to accept the new intake of the foreign students and putting $100,000 for the H-1B visa and all that. That is discouraging the people to go to the United States, which means that all the talented people may go to elsewhere. And Japan, South Korea, Europe, they are trying to attract those those people who might being able to come to United States may not, this is an opportunity for diversifying the destination. The problem is that whether you can use that as to capture as the industrial capabilities of ASML, Tokyo Electron, or Samsung, SK Hynix, etc. I think we still need to have certain, the national strategy to build up those capabilities in the different countries. And so far, the United States is so dominant in the hyperscaler, AI foundational models, and still, it is an attractive place to go. Probably it may change. Some people may go to China, but I think there are certain, inertia took place to build up those capabilities. And I think Japan, South Korea, or even the ASML, these are the manufacturing, industrial capabilities, not on the, software, the AI algorithm build-up capabilities. Innovations are happening in here in the United States. So I don't know. I mean, starting from 0 to 1 is a very difficult part.
We didn't get much of a chance to talk about human capital, but I absolutely agree with the audience member that human capital is essential here. And the U.S.'s superpower has been that for the last 80 years, we have been a magnet for the world's most talented people. And it isn't, it has everything to do with the depth of our capital markets, our regulatory environments, our rule of law, the predictability, and the fact that we have been a welcoming place for people from all over the world. And if any of those variables are diminished, it will impact our competitiveness. And so we have to be very mindful of that being open is part of our superpower. It is critical there. But with regard to diversification, I also very much worry that we're moving in a world where just the costs of investment at the frontier are so high that there's a hyper-concentration of risk when any market is focused on just a few players. There was once a time where Intel and Boeing seemed unassailable. It is possible, if we have all of our chips in NVIDIA, in Google, in OpenAI, that bad choices are made by those firms, and that the U.S. loses its advantage or it stumbles, as it did in semiconductor manufacturing and other areas too. And so I think it would be important for us to ensure that we have a healthy, diverse, competitive domestic ecosystem as well, because new ideas will come from unexpected places.
Go ahead, please.
I think it is important to develop the ecosystem on AI internationally. So in other words, that United States is clearly having most advanced knowledge set on AI, and then the South Korea, as you may not know, about 2 years ago we made alliance with the government of the Netherlands because of that, right? And then so I've been been to Hague pretty often. And when South Korea and the Netherlands launched the REAIM process, responsible AI in the military domain, I don't know whether you heard about it. And there is a global commission which consists of the experts from all over the world. But eventually, those from the West and then Korea and Japan actually participated a lot, and we produced this strategy report, which was released during the occasion of the United Nations Security Council. So, in other words, building the ecosystem, not being prevented or annoyed by the existing territory in certain field, right? That's very important. In the sense that United States, for instance, export control system needs to be placed in a way that private actors can have predictions to develop these ecosystems underneath this barrier. And what governments needs to do, not only supporting the development of technology, also ecosystem to be developed, also expanding the size of the future market that I have emphasized already, right? So that we can expand our current and the potential capability of sharing all these things in a comfortable way, right? So when we talk about the export control, then this is not something that private companies may want to hear, right? But it isn't necessary given the geopolitical situations of the world, but the government especially needs to consider all these kind of aspects. And then question is whether or not the United States is willing to do so in Washington, D.C.
I mean, I think this question on distribution, I think there's an overwhelming incentive to have more distribution. There's growing talk in the United States about an AI bubble that would be cushioned if you had a more distributed AI ecosystem. There's clearly all this demand globally for AI sovereignty that would be cushioned by having more distribution. So there's incentives at the kind of macro level, but man, are the barriers hard. We're talking about trillions of dollars of capital investments to compete at the frontier. There are only a handful of countries and companies in the world that can play that game, and they are almost all in the United States, and a few of them in China. Man, does it take a lot of energy to power these data centers. When OpenAI talks about Stargate building one in Abu Dhabi or in the United States, 5 gigawatts of power, that's the power that powers Los Angeles for a single data center cluster. Okay? There aren't a lot of countries in the world that can do that. That's why they're building out in the Gulf. That's why China may have an advantage over the United States in scaling down the road because of energy scale up. Man, are these things complex. If TSMC were easy to replicate, it'd be replicated. It's not easy to replicate. You can't even build TSMC fabs in the United States and replicate TSMC. They're doing better in Japan at this score, but it's hard. And ASML, boy, if it was easy to replace those guys, everybody would be doing it, and nobody can do it. And then you think of the software moat that NVIDIA has with CUDA, and you go down and down and down. And so the issue I have is not, is there an overwhelming, would it be good to have things be more distributed? Yeah, because I'd be less worried about a bubble and the international implications of that. But boy, is it hard to see a path from here to there, given all of these moats, capital, energy, complexity, software. Anyway, Moritz, you had your hand up a second ago.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Moritz from Amsterdam, the country of ASML. And Glenn called me an idealist when I proposed the same thing at Hoover last year, speaking on quantum and democracy, and I would have preferred utopian realist. But I have 2 short questions, and Andy, this is such a fantastic gathering, such a fantastic conference. First, how should United States companies protect themselves from IP theft? And the second one is I would like to hear the panel's thought on critical mineral supply chain in the context of geopolitical and geoeconomic computing power, and how an allied effort could create resilience.
Can I reframe Moritz's first question on IP theft to actually be not just about the United States, but also our closest allies and partners? Because we know from public disclosures, think Salt Typhoon most recently in the United States, that Chinese actors are crawling all over critical networks in the United States. If they're able to penetrate those networks, we can assume they're able to get after our frontier AI labs. But we also know that the problems are at least as bad in places like Japan and South Korea as far as information security. So how should we think about IP theft across the alliance here? Who wants to start?
I can say that there's coordination that's happening that I'm participating in ensuring that export controls are aligning. Strategies for insider risk programs within companies and universities and research institutes are aligning. So that again, I think the word interoperable came up in the last session, that we are interoperable and aligned and able to create webs of trust among ourselves so that we can continue to do business exactly the way we want to and ensure that within the ecosystem that we build, that IP is protected and technological innovation is protected together. Because if you protect the IP, but you protect it and securitize it so well that you can't innovate, that's not helping anyone, right? So it's about striking the right balance. And those conversations are in fact happening in a trilateral format, actually, in all the countries here. And we have a long way to go, but we've made significant strides, and they're positive discussions, as opposed to the sort of adversarial discussions about, here, you better adopt these export controls, you know. Now, with respect to the critical minerals question, you know, one of the, I think, really important breakthroughs that has happened in the last year, year and a half, is a shift in the debate. The United States, for you know, very understandable ideological and traditional historical reasons, has preferred market-based approaches to competition, you know, and that has worked extremely well for us historically. But there's now a recognition that challenging very large non-market actors may require non-market solutions. And the problem with our critical minerals strategy up to this point is we have, you know, expected, you know, Linus or some of the other players in the critical minerals space to be able to take on the power of the nation state and prevail, and that's just not going to happen because that nation state has much deeper pockets. And so we have to think more creatively and out of the box. And again, it isn't about becoming like China, but it is about, you know, striking the right balance of understanding that there are going to be some non-market solutions that involve minimum price supports, perhaps, you know, underwriting investments, you know, state investments, offtake agreements that will be part of the solution to the critical minerals problem. And gallium is a key example if you want to talk about semiconductors, when about 90% of the world's gallium is connected to China in some way.
Suh-Yong or Kazuto, do you have views on either the IP theft issue or the allied collaboration to address vulnerabilities?
Let me just bring the one of the issues in regard to how we're going to deal with issues in the context of the U.S. and China competition. So IP theft, you know, we can work together. We can build an efficient measure to address together so that everybody can be benefited, right? Here, when you say everybody, when everybody can be benefited, once again, which one are we talking about? Entire population on the earth, are you thinking? Or certain category of the population? That's very important because I'm talking about the size. Whenever I have a conversations with Chinese colleagues, my friends, their initial point is that we have a size, right? We will build our domestic consumption, that's for sure. Even IMF would support that. Then we will bring all the investments to China. So you do better listen to us. So China's big advantage is to have a big size, and that they are expanding the potential size again. And then the system, I believe very good, that we have can be penetrated into that field. That's the question that we have to answer, right? And then that is also related to critical minerals as well, right? When you talk about critical minerals, you know, China, you have many things, right? But we have Australia, for instance, right? Australia have some. But the reason why Australia has, cannot be the ultimate solution to us is of course, is a volume of the supply, maybe, but more important, the environmental concerns as well, right? Because of the regulation, environmental protection rate. Do you think it is not important? It is very important, right? You have to think about the climate change all the time, talking about energy, right? I have a little bit of the reservation talking about energy only, because energy issue is a part of the whole climate. Unless you understand the Paris Agreement, you can get the right answer on energy, right? And then climate and energy in the implementation of the policies domestically in China. The main reason why China has a big advantage is that they don't have to worry about the environmental protection, right, in the processing the critical minerals. So my question here, I don't have an answer, but I know that it's important. The system, institutions, and rules and norms that we believe good for all, and I do believe good for all, how we can make more, advantages out of complying with this in front of the group of the people who may not that much care about, right? So we cannot give up this, right? So how can we make a more competitive? Considering keeping this is very important. How? I don't know. If you have an answer, please let me know. We can work together.
There's a layer on
Yeah.
top of that which doesn't get talked about enough, power and environment. But it just so happens that the critical minerals in Australia, the Nordic nations, Canada, the United States also are disproportionately found in land that's inhabited by indigenous peoples that have histories of being treated very poorly by their governments. And so we also have to balance that as well.
And also China is having these processing factories in Xinjiang province or any minor, the minority regions. So that's where, they can get the cheaper product because of the reducing the cost of, treating the toxic waste coming out of this processing process. So probably I think that's one of the problem. If you leave everything into a market, then the Chinese cost of production of the critical mineral is much less than what we do in Australia or in Canada or elsewhere. So I think this is where this the Japan has established the Economic Security Promotion Act in 2022, and we from the experience of the Chinese export control on the rare earth mineral to Japan in 2010. So we have already been aware of the China using its dominant position as a weapon against the other countries, and this is what happened in the negotiation about the tariff with the United States, and I think that has been the problem, and I think one of the big issue is that China deliberately, knowingly using those exploiting the vulnerability that we have in terms of the gallium, germanium, etc. And I think this is, this has a certain effect on the production capabilities of our computing power. And I think what we need to do is to reshuffle and reconsider our mind to reestablish the resilience of our industrial supply chain in order to be less vulnerable, not being fully independent from a Chinese supply chain, but at least to diversify the supply chain to make sure that we don't depend exclusively to China.
Can I
yeah,
say
please,
something?
because we're at time, but please,
Yeah, sure.
Last word.
So I said I don't have an answer, right, on the question that I raised. Actually, I do have. But I don't have the details. That's why I was late. But you can think about this. So these days, my organization, hosts annually the Indo-Pacific Strategy Conference, okay, where this year I introduced a new concept of a climate economic security. Okay, that will help us actually to address many issues. So here, we talked about the energy issues and even others, right? I think that I'm flying to Belém, Brazil next week because to attend the UNFCCC, negotiations, climate change negotiations. I'm part of the Korean delegation. I'm the oldest guy in the delegation. Okay, this is the place where you bring the thoughts of AI, critical all these issues that I raised, right? We can build a strong and resilient ecosystem among ourselves, but we have to go beyond. Okay, so we can do that by developing internationalized standards, right? In a place where all others are trying to dominating, right, over the influence. Okay, so all the issues that we talked a lot actually have been considered and seriously negotiated in the UNFCCC. So I'm not surprised. It's natural, right? But we are living there, right? So giving all these potential benefits to others who are thinking, thank you very much, right? So, we have to develop, I think, especially, I sincerely hope that the United States, you do have a very strong capability in the supercomputing and whatever. I do believe so. And then we also have to share some of the pies with others, right? that will eventually give us actually building these institutional frameworks that we cannot give up in other societies.
Well, I think what this conversation illustrates is that AI is not just a general purpose technology. It is a general purpose accelerant and amplifier of a bunch of problems we've been dealing with for a long time. Energy and the environment, political and economic inequality, geopolitical competition. And so I think as we think about AI policy, we should endeavor in the spirit of optimism and collaboration to try to ensure that the intersection between AI and all these dynamics becomes a virtuous cycle, not a vicious one. And I learned a lot from this panel. Please thank me alongside me for our panelists for a great conversation.